Top of the morning, Dan, and in for Amy J this morning is John K. That is John Cash, Chicago Tribune columnist. Mentioned this story the other day, but we'll mention it again, John. Cook County State's Attorney's Office and its office holder, Kim Foxx, said the office will not be prosecuting peaceful protesters. Well, why would you even need to have a conversation if they were peaceful? Of course, you wouldn't. A peaceful protester wouldn't be in violation of the law. So
is that the peaceful protester coming out of the Nike store or the Louis Vuitton store with the bags and the? That's the one, right?
This is the will not prosecute peaceful protesters. The policy will apply to thousands of people arrested for things like violating the curfew, disorderly conduct. Is that peaceful? Though it excludes people who intentionally cause harm or damage. Intentionally.
I didn't mean to get this Louis Vuitton bag.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why it's in my U-Haul van.
Criminal trespass, disorderly conduct, curfew violations, those charges will be dismissed. It seems like she's not interested in prosecuting crimes that are much more substantial than even those. And this is a continuation of the non-prosecution culture in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, just as it is in other George Soros-funded state's attorney or district attorney's offices, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, in San Francisco, and elsewhere.
I've been writing about this for a long time, and so is David Jackson and Gary Marks at the Tribune.
It's the anti-broken windows strategy. The anti-broken windows.
Oh, and I wonder why we have violence now.
David Brown, superintendent, Chicago, he's been here about 2 months. He's wondering about some policies, too. He's willing to call them out by description, even though he's not willing to call out Kim Foxx by name.
I will continue to bring attention to the sheer number of repeat offenders who are given little to no jail time and low bonds and are placed on electronic monitoring that are not monitored by anyone and go on to commit more crimes. Like last week, Leroy Battle, who was arrested in August of 2018 for UUW and pled guilty and was sentenced to 18 months probation with special conditions. What did he do? He shot and killed 2 teenage boys on 79th and Luella on Father's Day weekend. With the help of our community members, we were able to charge Leroy Battle for these heinous crimes that robbed 2 teens of their futures. And I want to thank the residents again for their critical partnership.
There's not nearly enough coverage of discussion of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and the Cook County Circuit Court system, those other component parts of the justice system, and throw in the Cook County Sheriff's Department as well. Not nearly enough. Everything is about the Chicago police. What about the do you watch an episode of Law and Order? What about the prosecutors? What about the judges? What about the sheriff's office?
Hey, you know that you take all your listeners to Maracaibo or wherever you go. You know, the golfing in the Caribbean. Where is it this year?
It's not nowhere this year, thanks to your friend COVID.
Oh, guess what? Why don't you take them on a bus to the bond court on Monday?
26 in Cal?
26 in Cal.
I don't know if Apple will sponsor that. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I think actually you don't want to go to school. That's where everyone should go. See it, because you won't believe.
We got all the time in the world and all the resources in the world to devote to Jussie Smollett. And this is, central to the political indictment of Kim Foxx, the policy indictment of Kim Foxx, the judgment, the indictment of her judgment. What matters, yes, hate crime hoaxes matter because it creates an environment of racial tension unnecessarily and illegitimately. But what really matters are people's lives.
Yeah. But that matters too. Jussie Smollett matters because to me, because I want to still know from Dan Webb, Mr. Fed, tough guy, I want to know what the heck happened with Tina Chen and Obama's friends and calling in the favors if they did.
The Chen guarding the Fox House? For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined by Well, speaking of judges, Cook County Judge Pat O'Brien, who is also the Cook County Republican candidate for state's attorney against Kim Foxx this November. Pat O'Brien, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Good morning, Dan. Good morning, John.
Morning.
Good
And
judge.
so what about what Superintendent Brown had to say, and what about Kim Foxx's sort of anti-broken windows approach to law enforcement, to prosecutions or non-prosecutions, as the case may be?
Well, I know both of you know that the state's attorney is the chief law enforcement officer for the county, but for your listeners who may not know, what that means is that once the police make an arrest, whether in the city or the suburbs, if she decides not to bring felony charges, if she decides to slow down prosecution, if she decides to not recommend high bonds, that those persons either are still walking the streets without being charged or walking the streets after being charged and could be causing all kinds of havoc while they're waiting for trial. And she essentially has nullified theft statutes where she doesn't like the amount that's set. She's no longer prosecuting drug offenses. Obviously, she's no longer prosecuting people who break the curfew law, because now I guess it isn't a lawful order. And just last year alone, in 2019, Chicago Police Department presented 100 murder cases for charges, and she rejected them.
And what about you and your colleagues on the bench? How are they affording themselves in all this, in your estimation?
Well, I'm going to indicate that they wouldn't let me go to 26th Street as a judge. I ended my career in civil court at the Daly Center, and that's probably one reason why I decided to step off the bench. And as for the individual judges, I know a lot of them. A lot of them are former prosecutors. I think they do the best that they can, but essentially you've got a chief judge who is on the ride along in this car with Kim Foxx and Tony Preckwinkle. It's a triad of persons who really don't think the law should be enforced and that the jail should be empty rather than full, if that's what it takes to cut down crime.
Judge Tim Evans, the former alderman, who I believe played both sides a lot during the old council war periods, and the reason I know that is because I was there. That's how old I am, Judge.
I might be older than you, John.
But I remember Tim in his Armani suits. They looked really good. But aren't you really running against not only Kim Foxx, but Tim Evans, who basically yanked all the legit judges out of the bond court and put in the judges that Tony Preckwinkle and Kim Foxx wanted? And Tony Preckwinkle herself, who provides the budgets for both of the prosecutor and the judicial branch.
I would say yes. I mean, this is a situation where all the cards are stacked against people who obey the law in favor of people who break the law. But I think this, if the state's attorney's office does what it should do, and if the state's attorney himself, because it's not going to be Kim Foxx, is vocal about telling people with that pulpit they have that, these judges aren't doing their job, or the chief judge isn't giving us enough resources, or Tony Preckwinkle is cutting the staff of the office because she wants to make sure her security detail gets paid. I think that's part of the job of the state's attorney.
A criminal defense attorney friend of mine texted me that 74% reduction in street stops started long before George Floyd. Cops aren't getting out of their car when charges will always be declined. Cops hate the entire office. Now maybe he's just upset he has fewer clients to defend because charges are big. But I don't think so. I think he knows 26 and Cal very well, and he knows what's going on in the culture in those offices.
Well, I would agree, and the fact that Kim Foxx in her 3.5 years, and it seems like a lifetime, has been able to basically turn most of the public against her, most of her own assistants against her, and the police departments across this county. It's amazing. I called her a nullifier, but she's probably a unifier, but it's a unifier against her.
Well, but she's turned most of the public against her. The primary results would suggest otherwise.
Well, if you look at the people who voted both in the Republican primary and the Democratic primary against her, more people voted for other people rather than her. And she's in a first, obviously the first term incumbent who, although she didn't have Conway money, had more than enough money to be on commercials so much that she thought that she was the pillow guy.
With the Giza cotton sheets.
Yeah, there's no need to bring Mike Lindell into this discussion. He didn't do anything wrong. All right, so just let's talk about the race a little bit. So one of the things during the primary, I criticized you because I, as I recall, you said the reason you were running in the Republican primary was because it was an easier path to being Cook County State's attorney, and that struck me as transactional, not principled. So respond to that.
The response is this. I've worked for both Republican and Democratic state's attorneys, Republican Democratic attorney generals. None of them asked which party I was in. I never belonged to a party when I was in the office. When I ran for judge, which is what people point to back in 2006, there hadn't been a Republican elected judge countywide in over 30 years. I wanted to be a judge. I ran against the party and beat them. Now, in this instance, this office as state's attorney is rather unique. You don't get a Republican, a Democrat, a black, a white, any of the ethnic kinds of tribes that we have to sit in the office at the same time. You get one state's attorney, and that state's attorney has to understand that they're going to make decisions people don't like, but everybody's got to be of the opinion that the decisions are made for the right reasons on the law and facts. I believe in personal responsibility. The Democrats at this level of the county and state do not. I support the Republican ticket, and the fact that I'm a Republican who has at one point in time ran as a Democrat, I don't know, does that make, I wouldn't want to put myself in the same category as Ronald Reagan because he was both better looking and a better actor.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a shame to be where I am. And I'm asking independents and people that don't see themselves as lifelong Democrats to cross over and vote for me because we can't do it with just a Republican base in this county.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. I mean, just in terms of the conversion, I mean, the Reagan thing is invoked a lot, Trump thing to some extent. But, as soon as some of these people give a time for choosing speech at a Republican convention, like Reagan did at 64, I'll be a little bit more persuaded. But I mean, I want to understand, what you're going to do, because if you have any dalliance with Democrats, frankly, if you have any dalliance with the Illinois Republican Party, such as it exists and such as become, right, it calls into question your independence of thought and your commitment to culture change, which is what we're really talking about here. So I'm not, demanding you sign with the blood on the GOP line, particularly in this state. But these are legitimate questions given the phrase bipartisan combine, which my friend John Cass coined, that has persisted and destroyed this state in every respect, economically, morally, in terms of law enforcement, everything. And so what I'm pressing for is somebody that is willing to basically stand up against everybody on the inside for everybody on the outside.
Well, it's hard to say that, and then you could obviously say, well, that's just something you have said. But I will tell you this. Again, I ran against the Democratic Party, beat them. In the primary this time, I ran against the Republican Party, and I beat them. I realize that this office cannot stand another 4 years of Kim Foxx, and there isn't a Democrat in the world, as we saw in the primary, even if you had tens of millions of dollars, who could beat her and her base. The only way to beat her, take back this office, put back a law enforcement person who wants public safety, who favors the victim over the criminal. This is how you have to do it. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really ever think I would be doing this. And even though Smollett may be a small case, it was a big moving point for me because it showed she had no integrity. That the one thing I saw with all the state's attorneys I served under is that they did things for the right reason. They listened to the people who had been in the office for 10, 20 years, and they didn't do things like she has done, which is give a political break to Smollett, probably to keep the lines open for donations when she seeks higher office.
She wanted to be the Senate candidate to replace the unctuous Dick Durbin. Why don't we just tell people what happened?
Well,
all right. But let me ask you this, Judge. We're talking to Judge Pat O'Brien of the running for state's attorney in Cook County as a Republican. Danny Webb, the Sidney in, I think he's in the Sam Clements novels, the one who does the whitewashing. What do you think?
Okay.
What do you think of Danny Webb doing his big investigation of Kim Foxx and the Tina Chen business and the whole Jussie Smollett thing? And I saw Tim Novak's story several weeks ago, where he mentioned that Dan Webb forgot to mention key evidence or key information in the Michael Kochman investigation that he did, where the Daley family was involved. One of the Daley nephews was involved in the homicide of a 21-year-old kid, and Webb conveniently forgot to tell the court that I believe Michael Daley, the true boss of the Daley brothers, had received telephone calls. And when I heard
I saw that.
Right, Tim Novak's a solid reporter. When I saw
I saw that.
I thought, I want to know, what do you think of Dan Webb, and what do you think he's going to, given that context?
Well, obviously it's still to come, and I hope it comes soon before this election, and I hope it's the right decision. But of course, there's no question that in Chicago, you hesitate to assign the right reasons and the right decisions to anybody that has been in the system that long. But what he did do in re-indicting Smollett and announcing it, 3 weeks before the primary, that said something. He could have waited. So even though it didn't help the people running against Kim Foxx, it was something that, in terms of timing, he didn't have to do. And I guess it might have been a disaster for him, but in terms of the decision-making, he didn't have to do. Now, the question about what will happen with Kim Foxx, I think, is a question of who he puts in front of a grand jury, who he's willing to give immunity to, if it needs be, because we don't know all of the emails as texts.
How about her first assistant?
The first assistant has to go in, up and down that chain.
And given immunity. And April, what's her name? The one who was the ethics officer who was... Yeah,
who gave an opinion
resigned.
that it was ethically inappropriate, and then
resigned.
That opinion wasn't followed, and Fox said, I followed her opinion. I realize it's all of that. For instance, I'll be saying this, that I would have been content to basically continue taking a couple of cases in private practice, going into retirement totally, except for Smollett. I just could not see an office that is so important. It's important enough so that when my wife and I walk our dog on the north side of Chicago at 9 o'clock at night, I make sure I go with her. It's a situation where there is an actual fear that, crime is just not something that happens to somebody else, but it's something that could tap you on your shoulder when you're not looking.
And if you're elected, you're going to change the culture by bringing in real prosecutors, the Bob Mylans of the world, or people like him that are independent prosecutors that are going to enforce the law and they're going to work diligently to remove violent predators from the streets for a long time.
Absolutely. I already have about 15 or 20 people that are helping me in the campaign, most of whom are ex-prosecutors, a couple of whom would have been in various police departments. And it's my intention to make sure that the state's attorneys know we're back in the business of prosecuting crime, and that there is a culture change. Because I don't think these assistants understand what it is their boss wants them to do. I'll just give you for instance, and it isn't too deep in the weeds.
We're going to have to leave it there. We're up against it. Sorry, Pat. Judge Pat O'Brien,
okay.
Cook County Republican candidate for state's attorney. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks,
Appreciate it. You join us on the turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up at 7:07, Chadwick Moore. Now we check the headlines with Mike Scott.
Fire displaces 13 in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood. WIND Chicago News Time, 7 o'clock.
Democrats will get more info on what they see as another Russia scandal. I'm Dave Anthony, Fox News.
If this isn't treason, I don't know what is.
That's Congressman Seth Moulton seizing on reports President Trump disputes that he was briefed. Fox's Rachel Sutherland has more live.
Dave, CIA Director Gina Haspel, Director of National